Good morning, good morning, good morning. Everyone, welcome back to my armchair travel adventures as I continue to live as a local in Ethiopia. Well, one of the things I love about armchair traveling is that I meet these most interesting people. We don't always share the same language or beliefs or backgrounds, but we can share time and space and we can learn from each other. And it is my absolute pleasure to have today Jehsee from the House of Judah, the Lion of Judah, House of Rastafari. Hi, Jehsee.
Hey, how you doing? Bless
I'm
up.
so blessed up. I like it. I love it. Jehsee, first of all, can you tell me a little bit about the Lion of Judah, House of Rastafari? Because you're in Wisconsin. Is that correct?
That's right. So with me, I ended up a couple years ago. I ended up going to take my lifelong studies and experience, and I filed to register a nonprofit as a church. So I registered as a Rastafari church,
Yeah.
and call it Lion of Judah, House of Rastafari. And so it was a fairly easy process to do once you actually understand how everything works, but to get to that point, it was not easy. It took a lot of life experience.
Yeah. And what's the mission uh, of the Lion of Judah, House of Rastafari? What is your mission? And I noticed you used a church, so it's you consider it a religion as opposed to, or in addition to, a way of life.
So I think the word religion is just a word that is used in the West to describe culture of other people. So the things that people traditionally practiced in their culture has been defined as a religion.
Mm,
So it is culture as being a way of life. So it is more of a way of life. But when you have to deal with paperwork and different different ideas, you have to use that word religion kind of ambiguously sometimes.
I understand. And
Mhm.
how long, for you, have you always been on the journey of Rastafari? Is it something more like an awakening and you connect to that and then you sort of develop on your own solo journey? Because I believe I'm reading that Rastafari is very much an individual journey. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. Rastafari is something where you have to claim it. It's not something that it's not something whereby you can just go into a church or hang around people or read books or anything like that. It's something where you have to internalize it, and when it becomes real for you is when you step forward and you claim it, and then it becomes your reality. As long as as long as you're moving in a good way, you try to. The Bible is an important part of Rastafari as well as other religious books.
Mm,
So one of those being the speeches and utterances of Haile Selassie, and a lot of the advice that he gave. Those are some of the things that we incorporate into education and teaching people and learning, because
mhm.
his advice is like the advice of Christ in the 20th century. So, whereas Christ had told us that, in 2 days or in 2,000 years, that you'll see that Christ return again on the throne of David, and
Yeah.
he'll have certain titles that you'll recognize him by. So,
Mm,
Light of the World, Elect of God, King of Kings, Lion of Judah, King of Israel, King of Zion. All these different titles that are messianic titles that describe Christ's advent. Um, that's how we see His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie the First. Is his name means power of the Trinity. So that name doesn't indicate that God's power is with you. I don't know
mm,
what other name can. It tells you in Revelations that when Christ returns, He'll return with a new name in
right.
Revelation 3. So we know that the new name that's been revealed to us, that's on our foreheads, is Rastafari.
Ah, wonderful. I was going to ask you about where that name came in, and you said that so eloquently. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad this is on video so I can capture this. Thank you,
Mhm.
Jehsee.
No
But
problem.
you mentioned that Haile Selassie, he had quotes that you live by. Could you share something that comes to mind, or one of his quotes that you daily practice?
Yeah, one of them is very important that I always think of. It's very simple. It says, "Study and examine all, but choose the good."
Mhm.
So that's something I think everybody can relate to,
Mhm.
and it's transcending religion or other things. It's very straight to the point. You know, he told us to, you know, that we can find those lessons in the Bible, but also to seek secular knowledge and other knowledge, so that you have a good understanding of how the world works.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot more to life. Even within the Bible, you know, there's different books that have been taken out or purposely excluded. So some of those books being, for instance, the books that the Ethiopian culture, their church still carries these books, like the Book of Enoch, for instance.
Yeah.
The oldest version of that is written in Ethiopian language, the most complete version, and that book was referenced by Jude, the disciple, and also Jesus had referenced the Book of Enoch, speaking, you know, in some of his speeches to the disciples. So the book Enoch is definitely a legitimate book. Enoch, he ascended to heaven. He was the first person to ascend to heaven, and he was shown the mystery. And that book is like a more complete version of the book of Revelation, or it's at least supplementary to it. It's a little bit bigger. And another real important book is the Kebra Nagast, which is the Glory of the Kings, and that's a book that's part of the Ethiopian church. And that book tells the story of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, and how their firstborn son was Menelik, and he is the one that went on to inherit the throne of David from Solomon. And at a certain point in history, if you read in the Bible, the Queen of Sheba went to go visit Solomon, and it says that he gave her all her desire. So part of her desire was that she left with a baby, and that baby ended up becoming the king of Israel. So 225 descendants later is Rastafari, Haile Selassie the First, and so he's the last Christian king, and the last king of kings, and he's symbolizes the pinnacle of the movement of this revelation of Christ. It applies to not just Christianity, you know, it's also related to the tribe of Judah. So it has to do with the fulfillment of the Hebrew Israelites' prophecy of Christ in the last days. And also Islam. If you look into it, Ethiopia is the place where before before Mecca and Medina, the Prophet Muhammad sent his companions when they were almost defeated. He sent them into Ethiopia and told them that there'll be a king there that will save you and your religion, and he'll judge fairly in all matters.
Right.
So that king at that time, the king that was ruling Ethiopia, they referred to him as Nagushi or Nagush, Nagash. So that means king in the Ethiopian language,
Okay.
Nagas. And so at that time, that Orthodox Christian king had saved those early Muslims, and they ended up staying in Ethiopia for a time, and they learned the Orthodox religion, and they ended up. The Ethiopian tradition says they became the first converts from Arabs or from Prophet Muhammad into the Orthodox faith of Ethiopia,
Okay.
and so that Ethiopian king was the first to accept Muhammad as a prophet. And although he didn't necessarily advertise that to his kingdom necessarily, there's a story behind that too. But I would just say that's the time where he gave Muslims permanent asylum in Ethiopia for forever. So he said that there's no difference between our faith other than this, you know, there's a thin line. He drew a thin line on the ground and said, hey, the difference between you and me is nothing more than this line.
Is that
So
beautiful?
so at that time, we observed that the Muslims actually learned of their prayer and their different practices when they came to Ethiopia and saw the Ethiopians dressing in long white robes and praying 5 times a day and going through their routine. And then later, if you follow different traditions, Prophet Muhammad, his mother, that the one that raised him was an Ethiopian woman, and he would wear a black stone that he got from Ethiopia as a ring. And oftentimes he would speak to his companions and say things to them in the Ethiopian language, and then they would ask what it means, and he would explain to them what it means. And so there's a deep connection with Ethiopia, more than obviously the cradle of civilization, but also it has to do with tying all these world religions together and these cultures. And traditionally, His Imperial Majesty has shown us that Ethiopia has been a mixing pot for Ham and Shem. So the two nations of Ham and Shem have
Okay.
traditionally grown and mixed in Ethiopia, and that's part of the reason why also you see many Ethiopians are more light skinned instead of more dark with those more dark Negro features. It's more light skin with more of a longer nose and more of a thin face and a lighter skin. Hair is oftentimes more like mixed, like mixed people's hair. Still,
Okay.
still you have an afro, but maybe not as tight. The
Okay.
curls are not as tight. So
And
that's part of the history.
that is a lot of history. Like you must have spent years learning and acquiring this knowledge. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I've been traveling to Jamaica for a long time. I went there about a dozen times. I started going there around 2002 or so, and I went there about a dozen times. I learned at that time I learned of Rastafari and the Lion of Judah. People were telling me, I started to speak with a lot of different Rasta brothers over there, and they're giving me some insight into history. So before that, I was raised as a Lutheran, as a Christian growing up in America. And eventually, when I became 18, I wanted to seek out the origins of religion, my religion, Christianity, and Judaism. And all those things led me to Rastafari in Ethiopia.
It's really interesting that you bring up Jamaica, and I've always thought of Jamaica as where the Rastafari religion and movement started from. Is that fair? Would that be true, or is my knowledge a little bit limited here?
It's partially true. I mean, if you look at it in this way, the movement or the culture of Rastafari, the way of life, is not something that started in Jamaica. That's something that is African, and it's part of Ethiopian tradition, part of the Nazarite tradition, and different biblical traditions. It all comes back through Ethiopia, but Jamaica ended up becoming part of this story because Jamaica was part of a very big part of the, you know, I would say not only the civil rights movement, but also the Pan-African movement. And during those times in the early 1900s, especially, was the time where in the West, Black people over here were still fighting, to get a lot of rights as of now the same way. But at that time, it was more severe, and people were starting to kind of have a different consciousness and awaken to the fact that Africa's history didn't begin with slavery. So people started to realize that there was kings in Africa that are connected to biblical stories, and so Jamaica had the zeal. They more had the zeal to bring forth that testimony more than other people, and they brought that forth through music and different other people who were bringing forth that enlightenment to people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not specifically, that thing. I would say that's what gave Rastafari the light and the shine.
Yeah.
But even before that, in the early 1900s in East Africa, there was a lot of fighting against colonialism happening at the time. So when that was happening in the Great Rift Valley area in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Rwanda, all them places, Ethiopia was the only place that maintained their independence from colonialism all throughout history, whereas the rest of Africa was primarily colonized and uh, had a lot of slavery impacting their countries more so, and they had other people ruling their governments. So their language was changed, their alphabet was changed, their culture was changed. But Ethiopia had maintained their originality and their culture up until the present day. So I guess we find that tradition is I guess the last 2,000 years since Yeshua the Christ was on earth. The Bible story continues. It didn't just end with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or the prophets before that. The testimony continues with Ethiopian history. So all of the things that relate to what happened to Christianity after Jesus, it's all rooted in Ethiopia. Like the first person that was baptized after the resurrection was an Ethiopian eunuch coming from Queen Kandaki, who they call Candace, from Ethiopia. And he was already versed in the scriptures. He was reading Isaiah, and then disciple Philip had met him and showed him more clearly the scripture and revealed to him Christ in the scripture. And then he went back to Ethiopia at that time, and that was how the faith of Christ entered the kingdom of Ethiopia. And later, after that, for a period of time, they had what's called the Desert Fathers, or they had just monks and recluses that were living in Ethiopia and Egypt, and they were living in mountains and caves and in the wilderness, and they were living more or less what you would consider a Rastafari life. And so it wasn't until later, around the year 330, that Constantine tried to or did, blend Christianity into the official European Roman religion. So then you start to get this the rise of the Roman Catholic Church and things like that. But Ethiopia already had Christianity long before that. And at that time, they had King Ezana from Ethiopia. And King Ezana, they have coins that are still printed from that time with him and his name and face on it, showing like the Christian cross representing their, the custom of their kingdom. And so around the same time, Ethiopia formed the church, the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, which is maybe a different institution than necessarily the Orthodox faith, because originally it wasn't necessarily organized in such a way where you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but anyway, so the church and the history is somewhat tied together, but it's also somewhat divided, because the actual history predates the institution of the church. And nowadays, what you'll find is that not necessarily the faith, but the church has also been corrupted. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has also been corrupted, much like the Western churches. So if you go into the Ethiopian churches now, you'll find images of white Jesus and white Mary and all the disciples white and things like that. But previously it wasn't like that. So if you go to Ethiopia, you'll find in some of the churches, you'll find some of these original artifacts showing Jesus and everybody as Black Ethiopian people. And so that's part of the whitewashing that happened due to the commissioning of the Pope trying to paint Jesus as a white person using a man named Caesar Borgia, which was the man that they used to paint the image of Jesus into a white person. They based it off of that man. So that came years later, and that was just used as a psychological tool to make African people submit to a perverted idea of religion or a perverted idea of Christianity, whereby African people were not really included. They were more like just for, to be servants or excluded from any of the book. So it's only due to Ethiopia maintaining their history and their religion and fighting to defend that faith over the last thousands of years that we've been able to keep that history intact and present that to the world in this last later days in time.
Mm. And I was reading also about, and this all very, very fascinating. And also reading about Rastafari schools. Is this part of the curriculum? I don't know if you know this, but teaching about Ethiopia and the history, and would that be part of the curriculum of that's taught? Or should it?
Yeah, schools. You saying what? Are you asking
Yes, I
me?
know that there are Rastafari schools, and I was just curious about what the curriculum would involve. Would it talk a little, much of what you shared with us now, would it include that part of history, Ethiopian history and the history of religion? Is that part of the curriculum?
Yeah, that's very much a part of it. And there is different schools that various camps of Rastas have opened up in different places around the world, different countries. They're setting up, different communities and schools, education, and other means of helping people. And the primary focus on that is to give people the other half of the story that hasn't been told,
Mm,
which is Africa's contribution to the Bible, which is the, the the main contribution of the Bible. The story of the Bible is written about Africans. So it's only through Ethiopia appears more times in the Bible almost than any other country. It's mentioned on the first page of the Bible when it talks about the Garden of Eden and the rivers run around Ethiopia.
mm,
So everything comes back to this Ethiopian culture, and so that's the primary focus, educating people, and it's not only just focusing on historical lessons and religion and things like that, but it's also focusing on more simpler things, just common sense things on how to treat people, how to live calm
mm.
with no compulsion in your life, and how to eat clean, eat foods that edify you, and they don't cause you to age in a certain way. So generally, it's not a necessarily a mandatory for every person, but generally, when people start to gravitate toward Rastafari, they end up becoming more natural. So they end up, if they're women, they might leave their weaves and their hair things alone and start eating more vegetables and fruits and giving up meat, things
Okay.
like that.
Mhm.
So it's all part of trying to stay natural, stay healthy.
Yeah. You know what? I was doing some research and came across, let me get it right. Here in Canada, there is the Sanctuary of Rastafarian Order. And on their website, I don't know if they're still functioning, but on their website, there's a section for meditation time and meditation over medication, essentially. And so I thought, I was really interested. I wonder if meditation is a huge part of Rastafari culture.
Yeah, speaking of meditation, that has to do with the herbs. We got those herbs right here, which is cannabis, and oftentimes we use that through meditation. And cannabis is something whereby this is not just Rastas that are saying cannabis is part of the religion or the culture, but if you actually Google and you check out the word cannabis, the root word, it comes from a Hebrew word, which is kane bosm, Kanehbosm, which means the cane or the sweet smelling cane, the sweet incense cane.
Mm,
So that's kane bosm. That's where we get the word cannabis. And recently, there's been articles a few months ago, even published on BBC News and others, that they found some different temples in Israel and other places where they actually had cannabis and hash residue on the altar of the children of Israel on these different altars that they found, that they unearthed. So cannabis has been burned as an incense and as a prayer offering for a long time, and not just smoked, but also eaten or drank as a tea. Traditionally in Africa, they've been doing that for a long time, as well as India and many other places around the world. And so the meditation is something whereby the herb is just something that it helps you meditate, because it helps you organize your thoughts, and it also, from my experience, when you smoke herb, Bob Marley said, when you smoke herb, it reveals you to yourself. And the thing that I've taken from it since I've been smoking herb is that it opens your consciousness. It lifts a veil from your eyes. And what happens when you smoke herb, some people say they become paranoid. And the reason they become paranoid is because if you have guilt on your conscience, if you have a bad conscience, then when you smoke herb, it opens up your mind to the truth of life. And it's almost like those pictures you see in the cartoon where you have the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
and so it's like you the clarity of right and wrong becomes so much more obvious when you use herb. So if you're a person that's inclined toward good, you'll feel that pressure when you're smoking herb in terms of you'll reflect on your life, or you'll reflect on certain aspects of life, and then you'll come to a deeper conclusion that this thing is not right, or this thing is not the way it should be in this order, or or the opposite, you might feel that this thing is right, this thing is what I'm supposed to do. So that type of a general feeling overcomes you in a conscious way, and it makes you more aware of your choice. And so therefore, if you choose to do wrong at that point, you become heavily inflicted with guilt, and the guilt will stay on you. It'll become like you're paranoid because you're fighting internally against your own self. But if you have a good conscience and a good mind, and you don't have guilt, then those same consciousness will say to you, hey, this is the right thing to do. And if you're good-minded, you'll say, it's so easy for me now. It's so much easier for me to see it and choose, because through your meditation, it became more clear. So if you're a good-minded person, it can really help you. And if you're a bad-minded person, it can make you paranoid until you deal with your problems.
Ooh, isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
And I also, and this, I thought this was really fun because I've come across, different terminologies through the years, and I never really understood it. So maybe you can help me with this.
Sure.
I would hear someone say enjoy versus enjoy, or overstand versus understand. Can you talk about this? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, and there's other words like I and I instead of we or you and me. And there's
Yes,
another one, instead of saying next week, you'd be like next strong.
I have
So
heard that.
yeah, instead of using these words that have a psychological impact, like the word weak, we're not weak, so we're strong. So we don't use the word weak, And
Okay.
there's other things. If you understand something, you're beneath it. But if you overstand it, you're above it. Now you've grasped it and you've conquered it,
I did
So
not know this. This is knowledge. This is what this is about, seeking knowledge. I didn't know that. Okay.
and then another thing is like the words I and I. So oftentimes it's important to communicate that there's no division between us. We're all one. So instead of separating us by saying you and me, we just say I and I. It's the same.
Mhm. Interesting. And one of the other things that I'm reading about is my friend who grew up in Ethiopia. She mentioned that there was a really huge Rastafari Jamaican um, culture and society growing there, developing over the years. And I was interested whether there was a movement, or just like how in um, Muslims will make a trip to Mecca, they'll travel there. Is that the same thing for Rastafari? Do you try, as part of your journey, to go back to Ethiopia, go back to the motherland, so to speak?
Yeah, exactly. That's a real important part. And the same way, even in Islam, Ethiopia is a holy place where even Muslims go there too, and also Christians pilgrimage there, and the Jews also pilgrimage there. So Ethiopia, in that way, we consider Ethiopia to be New Jerusalem.
Okay.
And if you look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia is representing the renewed kingdom of David, the renewed kingdom of Zion. And that kingdom is a real kingdom on earth, where God had promised that to David, that there'll always be a descendant on earth to rule on your throne.
Mhm.
So you can't just say Jesus is the one, because Jesus came, he did his thing, and he's part of the history, but he's not the one that's sitting on the throne in Ethiopia for the last, thousands and thousands of years, and having the tradition of being the king of that country. In terms of this is a strictly Ethiopian thing that is basically the fabric. It's like a real crucial point of, or how can I say, it's an integral part of the faith, or the way of life. Ethiopian culture is that way of life in a sense. Their language is called Amharic, and it's also Ge'ez, Geez, which is an older version of Amharic. But so some of the ancient books are written in Ge'ez, and the language of the Ethiopians is a Shemitic language. So it's all connected, very similar to Arabic and Aramaic and Amharic and Hebrew. They all have similar root words, it's the same root language. But I would say that the Ethiopian language is the original form. And if you look at it, it's glyphs. It's like the same as you see glyphs in Egypt, the glyphs, and also in Arabic you see glyphs, and also in Sanskrit you see glyphs. So you'll find that a lot of the different words that are preserved in the Ethiopian Ge'ez Amharic, these words have transferred over to other countries and languages. So a given example is the word like Ras. Ras means prince. And then so in India they say Raj, Raj. And then among the Hebrew Israelites or Judah, they say Rosh, like Rosh Hashanah. It's a holiday, Rosh Hashanah. So these words carry over, and there's so many other words, like for instance the name Haile Selassie is it means power of the Trinity. So the first word is Ha-El, Ha-El. So it's like if you look at it, it's the Ha means the. In the same way in Arabic and Latin languages, you have El or La, right, meaning the. But in Amharic, it's Ha. And then the word Ila is the same word you find Elo, Eloi, Allah. It's the same Ilah. So the power, the divinity, the power.
Okay.
So even we can see the similarity in the name of Haile Selassie, the power, or it's like the same root word of Ilah. So the word Allah is Al-Ilah. And then in the Hebrew word, you have El Eloh, El Eloh, El Elohim, El Eloah, right? So you have these same root words, El, but in Ethiopic it's Ha. So once you realize that that is just something that means the, then the root word is Ilah or Ilah,
Yes.
So all of these things are deeply rooted into the language and the culture and the names of the people, and you'll find that. And so it's once the more you look into it, you can't turn away, because you're only lying to yourself.
It's beautiful. I studied this week, obviously, because I'm armchair traveling through Ethiopia. So I was able to study a little bit of Amharic this week. And let me see if I pronounce it correctly. It's Tena Yisatet Lena. And I thought it was a greeting, and I thought it was so beautiful. May God grant you health on my behalf. That's a beautiful language. And thank you was Ames-egina-lehu, right? And is Amharic spoken in the Rastafari as you're talking dialects? Yes, please.
Yeah, so that's funny because that's a good question. There's a lot of words, like even the same way you see like salama, I think salama or salamata is a Ethiopian word like peace. And then if you greet somebody, it's in Islam, it's salam, or it's peace be upon you, or salam alaikum. And
Yes.
those, so even when Jesus had greeted people in the Bible, you'll find that when he greeted them, he's like, peace be upon you.
Mhm.
So all these things carry, but now, like for us, especially in this time, so many people have been separated from the roots of that culture and language. People have different cultures and language now, so it's for us to create our own language and come out of this Babylonian language. So that's why you find, you know, there's a subtle difference in Jamaica. Like, where are you from,
I'm
by the way?
Antigua, so close, but not Jamaica, but close island.
So you understand the Caribbean culture, and I'm sure there's a lot of Rastas in Antigua, right? The same way,
Mhm.
and there's also a certain, y'all might not speak exact patois like Jamaicans, but it's something similar. You
Mhm.
know, it's still something with your own slang and
Sure.
your own version of English. So, in the same way, the Jamaican English is English in many ways, but using words in different ways, and also using uh, adding words, changing words, like we mentioned before, overstand, and different words like strong and weak. And so you try to, as time goes on, you add those things to make the language grow in a new way and give it more creativity and power. And you eliminate those things that are invoking spells on you, because you know when you're spelling these words, you're putting spells out there that are casting your mind into a certain place, and the more you
Well,
invoke those things. Yep.
I'm going to pause right there. Words have truth. Words have,
Hmm.
you speak life into your life. So, I may not have understood I did not overstand
Hmm.
what you were saying, a lot of Rastafari dialect and words, but I do understand, overstands, I have to train myself, but I
Yeah,
do
and the more,
overstand that, right?
yeah, and it makes more sense
True.
because you yourself know if you're beneath something, you can't be above it. You know.
Yeah. No,
So
this has been good.
so it's not just stuff for fun and games. It's like there's actual science and wisdom behind it, and
Mhm.
it's also in a way, it sounds cool too. It's like something that's even part of modern culture, because if you look at the music industry in general, I'll say that Jamaicans have the coolest way of speaking English. You know,
Well, hold on now.
right? They got the most flair and the most you know. So now some of that slang and some of that creativity is coming into hip hop and USA culture, and it's even becoming part of the world culture.
Yeah,
But it's kind of just cool to watch it develop.
yeah.
And so at the same time, it's important for us to also try to remember some of those root words and learn some of those or enough of those and make the comparison. So
Mhm.
yeah, by the way, I don't know if you had noticed how much you know about me before you ended up contacting me the other day, but a couple years ago now, I had got arrested. I'm actually dealing with a case right now where I have a lawsuit against the city and the police because they raided our church and they took our sacrament, our herb, and they seized my bank and they broke things and they put us in jail and and eventually caused us to be evicted. So all of that before I was even convicted of anything, and I'm still not convicted of anything. So I have this lawsuit against them that's supposed to be resolving in April, maybe a potentially $1 million or so lawsuit around there, and because of all these violations that they did against us for freedom of religion. And so long story short, when they arrested me, we went into court, and my initial appearance, they called me up there, and I was representing myself. I didn't have any attorney, and I told them he's asking me questions, and I told him I require a translator. I require a translator in the Rastafari language, my language of my society, and
Mm.
I don't understand legalese. That's not my language. I don't have any degrees in legalese, so I require a translator from my society, Rastafari society. And every time he would ask me or talk to me about something else, I would just repeat myself because that's the point that we're on right now. they have to first look at this and say, if this was another person that had a society and a culture, we're obligated to give them a translator so that we're on the same page. And the truth is, we're not on the same page because we speak one way, we understand things one way, and you understand and speak things a different way, and we're not seeing eye to eye. So, the truth of the matter is, if it was any other group, and they know the rules, you have to give to all societies and people equally. You can't just give it to some and then exclude other people from having a translator. Well, they didn't like to hear that. So then he told me, could you just go and just sit down again, and we'll talk to you at the end after everybody's gone. We'll bring you back up and talk to you again. So then I waited, and then he brought me after enough people went. Another 45 minutes passed. Then he called me up there again. Now this time he's more prepared, and he's trying to figure out how he's gonna rope me in now. So then I keep repeating the same things to him. And anyway, we went back and forth, and there were some other things that I did in terms of the things that I required of him and said to him that caused the court to go a certain way. And at the end of the day, he never did rule on my on that requirement that I put in his court. He left that open and never ruled on it. And so what happened is at that time, I was dealing with this criminal case that was for my criminal charges, and then also I had the federal lawsuit that I filed. But I'm not so familiar with how to go about doing a federal lawsuit. It's like a lot of work. It takes a lot of technical knowledge that I don't really have. So even though I might be able to represent myself in such a way, there's still some technical things that I don't know. So I decided at that point, I talked to a lawyer, and he agreed that he would represent me in the criminal case and also in the federal lawsuit case. Okay. So he's been helping this whole time, and hopefully everything's going to come to a good resolve soon. It'll be a big case. You'll see it on the national, international news probably. Okay. Because a lot of my other stuff, when they were putting me on the news, that they had all the news there recording all this stuff, and I'm telling them I require a translator. You should check it out later, or I'll send you a link. It's great. And
okay.
Yeah, and anyway, it became like a real big thing where now people have seen that thing all over the world. They even had me on Showtime, like a Showtime special. There's two guys on there. I don't remember their name because I don't watch Showtime, but it's two African American brothers on there that they got some type of a comedy show where they're drinking beer together and stuff like that. Anyway, I can't think of it, but they were talking about me on there, and then I don't know, it was all over different newses from different countries were publishing the story. So I know what we're doing is good, and we're going to keep doing it, and there's nothing they can do about it, and we're going to keep moving forward. Yeah.
That is amazing. Well, thank you for sharing your truth with me and sharing your story and journey. And Jehsee, please.
You had a lot of questions that you had wrote to me. Did you get all the answers? I know there's
I
a lot of them.
I did. I have this little list going through this, and I'm like, oh, he talked. But the thing about you, Jehsee, you're just so eloquent, and the way that you formulate your knowledge and the way you share, you were knocking off questions, before I even asked them. But so we've come to the end of our show, and I just wanted to say thank you. I want to say I appreciate you for the time you took to speak with me and just share your truth and your knowledge with me. And I'm sure there's things in there that I might incorporate in my own life and my own truth. And I just want to appreciate you for this time. Is there anything you would like to say?
Yeah, I really appreciate you contacting me. It's an honor that you consider me and contact me, and I appreciate it. I hope you have a lot of success in doing what you're doing. I didn't previously know about Tea Time, but I have to check you out now and follow you and see what's going on.
No, I give you appreciation and gratitude. And I did remember that in Ethiopia, gratitude is a huge part of the culture. And so always wanting to end in gratitude and saying thanks and Ames-egina-lehu. Thank you.
Blessed love, sister.
Goodbye.
All right. Bless.